Today is the 10th of March, 2015, and our topic is the impact of Ed Snowden and Glenn Greenwald's exposure of the United States intelligence agencies on foreign policy, on the current foreign policy. Anyway, Dave DeWitt is the guest, and he is the lead reporter for the Athens News, and I am Robert Whaley, retired historian from Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, and this is called the Athens Speakout number 322. Now, we're going to review what we did last time because we've already discussed the Snowden case. And we discussed on television how this young man, Ed Snowden, became an agent working for the CIA, the DIA, and the National Security Agency, or the NSA. And the CIA's proper name is the Central Intelligence Agency, and the DIA is the Director of Intelligence, and National Security. We have three major intelligence agencies. And the young Ed Snowden was a whiz as a kid on using internet and email and computers and so forth and so on. And he then collaborated with a journalist, an experienced journalist, a liberal American-born journalist by the name of Glenn Greenwald. And Greenwald began publishing Snowden's surveillance work because he was reading thousands of documents from these intelligence agencies. And Greenwald had access to publishers in England, and they published, that is, Greenwald published Snowden's information in the very liberal left-wing journal called the Guardian, the London Guardian. And the problem there is the U.S. publications could not get to the London Guardian because England is still a sovereign country. And that's how this revelation of American intelligence operated. So that Greenwald was an American citizen working for The Guardian, and he could always go back to New York. And he was then an international historian who was very much interested in what Snowden had found. Anyway, Snowden read tens of thousands of secret mail, and he gradually became alienated from the United States Constitution. He gradually defected because George W. Bush, in fighting war in Afghanistan and Iraq and not coming up with any solution to this never-ending war, he gradually discovered that they were spying on hundreds of thousands of Americans. Anybody who telephones can be picked up by these agencies, and they put these telephone records in a deep hole somewhere in Kansas or something, and can always come back to put their finger on some American innocent citizen. So Ed Snowden then was observing this from a long distance, and he was passing on the information, and he then, well, both of them, both Ed Snowden and Glenn Greenwald said that American civil liberty, the American Constitution, was being violated wholesale by these spy organizations. And the two of them worked hand in glove. And we spoke about that, how George W. Bush's prestige was being reduced by this information. Now, the Democratic Party being led by Barack Obama, who was elected as president in 2008, was a very weak president. He was unable to bring the Afghan war to a close or win it. He was unable to bring the Iraq war to a close or win it because Barack Obama came from the White Islands, and he was the first black president. So he had no insight into the Washington political establishment. And he then was very good on television in winning elections in 2008 and in 2014, but then he lost the Congress in the off-year elections in 2010 and again in 2014. Obama then was nominally president, but he could not deal with the complex wars in the Middle East, which involved Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, and Obama even extended it into Syria and Libya and Yemen and Pakistan. And this leaves the presidential campaign of 2016 up in the air because the Republican candidates don't know anything about the Middle East, and Hillary Clinton doesn't know anything about the Middle East. So we're dealing with amateurs in Washington, and the Bill of Rights is being undermined, and constitutional liberty is being undermined. And there are millions of files on American citizens still being stored. And what's still missing is tons of information that Ed Snowden may have on his little jump drive, because he took with him many more records than have so far been released. So he supposedly has 1.8 million documents, and they've only released 10,000 of them here and there in order to embarrass both Bush and Obama. So anyway, that is the problem. And the elections then of 2014 were very contradictory, because the journalists of America are moving to the left, and they're picking up the Obama greenwald information. Meanwhile, in the elections in 2014, the voters are moving conservative in the opposite direction, and the Republicans won big. And Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, became the majority leader of the Senate, and John Kasich won in Ohio, and the Republicans picked up 10 seats in the Senate and 4 seats governors. And the paradox is, where is the country now headed? So there were 4 new governors, and 3/4 of all the governors are now Republicans. And the Senate and the House of Representatives are in Republican hands, and the Supreme Court is in the Republican hands. So will the Democratic Party survive is a big question. And the mass media is getting a heyday because they're getting publicity no matter who you believe. There are Republican journalists and Democratic journalists, and Obama is vacillating. Obama and Kerry speak like they're hawks on one month, and the next day they speak like doves. They talk about, well, we may have to go to war against Russia for the Ukraine, and then they back off. Well, there's going to be a ceasefire. And then they talk about ISIS, Iraq, Syrian caliphate. Oh, we got to escalate. Oh, we're going to have to back off. We can't send American boys on the ground. Maybe we can get some Egyptians. Maybe we can get some Turks to do some of this fighting. So nobody knows how long these wars will last. And there are people who are talking about a short war, and there are people who are talking about a 10, 30 years war in the Middle East. So anyway, that's where we are, and ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS are into this debate, and Obama seems to be ignorant of the details of how Wall Street operates. He's never had any experience in banking. He is inexperienced about the oil companies. He doesn't know anything about the Senate, inside Senate. They're run by old boys, all white, more or less, or mostly white. So he's kind of out there as an individual who's great on television, and he is able to convince voters as long as he's the candidate and doesn't have to act as the head of the Democratic Party and win any congressional seats. So he had to relieve. After his first term, Chuck Hagel either resigned or Obama got rid of him, because Chuck Hagel was the Secretary of Defense in the first term, and he was a senator from Nebraska, and he sees that there's not going to be any triumphal victory, so he resigned, and they're going to have a new Secretary of Defense in this second term, and I think his nomination is still in hold. It hasn't been confirmed yet. Eric Holder resigns, and they're talking about a new Justice Department head, the Attorney General. So Obama is an early lame duck, we must admit. And Kerry seems to be taking all of the orders from Obama, and neither one of them have any clear policy of whether they want a ceasefire, whether they want to negotiate. There's no strategy in Washington with either party. Okay, I think we've had enough of that. I'm going to ask our guest question number one. Do you have any new information or further questions about Ed Snowden and his role as a secret agent, or why he went to Russia and sought asylum in Russia?
I do have new information, and the reason I have the information is because I did watch the Citizen4 documentary.
Okay, tell us about it. I didn't see it.
It's on HBO right now. It's playing on HBO, and it's on demand on HBO. And this is the film that was directed by Laura Poitras.
Oh, yeah. She was involved in their escape to China.
Yes, and that's what mostly the movie concerns.
Right.
It opens up with Edward Snowden's communications to her and Glenn Greenwald, and when he was anonymous and known only as Citizen4.
Okay.
And it sets up the meeting of them going to Hong Kong in China and meeting with him and interviewing him and reviewing all this information that he had to share. And the documentary, I think it's important for every American to view, because it shows, we discussed a lot his motivations and why he did it. Well, he says explicitly why he did this and why he brought this information to light. And part of it, the one part that I thought was fascinating that he mentioned was this stuff was going on under the George W. Bush administration.
Sure.
Right?
No question about that.
He was working for, he was working for a private contractor with the Defense Department for the NSA.
Right.
And he, like I did when Barack Obama was campaigning for president in 2008, going around, I saw him in Columbus.
Oh, you saw Obama?
Yeah, I saw him a couple times, but the time that I remember distinctly, he was at a high school in Columbus, and he was giving a speech about the security state, the national surveillance state,
right.
And he was a constitutional law professor.
That's what
and he brought that up. He said, you will have a president who studied the Constitution of the United States, and I know the Constitution of the United States, and I will bring the Constitution. And he said that, and I believed him. You know, I thought, this is great. We have someone who's going to uphold the Constitution. And apparently Mr. Snowden was as disappointed as I was when President Obama not only didn't roll back some of the more offensive programs of the Bush administration, but expanded them.
Right.
And when this happened, Snowden says in the documentary, that's when he decided to take action and let the American people know what the government was doing.
Good summary of that. Okay, I have a second question. Do you have any new information about or questions about Glenn Greenwald as a journalist and how he became such a powerful advisor to Ed Snowden and his connection with Laura?
Yeah, so I guess Laura...
Does he come into this picture?
Yes, and they both meet with Edward Snowden
right.
in Hong Kong at the same time. So they all meet at once,
right.
Laura and Glenn and Ed. And I guess my first impression from Glenn Greenwald was to be impressed by the shrewd journalistic instincts that he displayed, because the very first reaction that he had after looking at this information was, okay, we've got about 1,000 stories here. Which, as a journalist, you know right away, yeah, of course, that's how, because, you know, the more stories you have, the more newspapers you sell, the more attention you get, the more you can drag the stories out, and the more opportunity you have. So I saw the journalist in him right away when he said that.
He has a master's in journalism.
Yeah.
From George Washington University in D.C.
GWU, huh?
GWU.
So I could tell,
and besides this, he has a law degree. Now,
both
law and journalism and history are tied together.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because we all ask who, when, where, how, and most important of all, why.
Right.
How do events unfold, and why are the public, who seem to have only an 18-year-old mentality, always surprised?
Yeah.
You and I are never, not that surprised.
No.
I was surprised by Ed Snowden.
Robert, I think Greenwald got his law degree from NYU.
That's correct. Yeah, he was
okay.
originally from Manhattan. He is a kind of a substantial, rich Jew family, and the Jews know how to get into journalism. They're key to the journalist profession.
Well, you could
and
tell
they're
that he
key
was
to the legal profession.
You could tell he was a pro right away. And that he was directing things, because Edward Snowden admitted in the documentary off the bat, I don't know much about media. I don't know how this works. I trust you guys.
Right.
I'm putting myself in your hands.
Right.
And one of the more interesting things that I thought that Edward Snowden did right away was he said to them, I want you to put the target on my back for this as soon as possible. Because he didn't want people who were close to him or vaguely connected to him to catch the blame for this. He wanted it to be squarely on his shoulders, and he made that very clear right away. And the journalist expressed the typical things that a journalist might. They want to protect his family. You know, they want to make sure that the story is about what the government is doing and not about personality, which is a concern that Edward Snowden expressed. He said, in our media climate today, sometimes things are so much about personality. I don't want this to be about my personality. I want this to be about what the government is doing that the American people need to know about.
Good. Well, let me see if I have anything additional to say. I think you did a pretty good job there. Now, Greenwald is a hotshot publisher. You know, as these things come out in The Guardian, he's published 5 books about every 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. And his last book is called No Place to Hide. And this is the key to this whole thing. You can't hide from these 5 intelligence agents. Big Brother is watching every one of us.
Very much.
Where are you going to go?
Yeah.
Well, he's got 2 passports, I guess. I guess he has one in England. He has one in...
And so it's not, it's no surprise he winds up in Russia, of all places.
Well, Russia was, Russia didn't have to take him.
No.
And he tried to go to China first, Snowden wanted to go to China. And the Chinese are closely tied into the United States because of the trade. The United States is putting up factories and lending money and so forth and so on. Russia is still somewhat independent because they haven't had the ties of the economics that the United States and China are building up. So the Chinese wouldn't go along with. Yes, we have a question here.
Robert, he did spend a little bit of time in Hong Kong, I believe.
Yeah, well, Hong Kong's a so-called independent, autonomous
I
region.
understand that, but that's close by.
But he couldn't get into the People's Republic of China.
And that's where they all met, actually, for this.
Yeah, well, that's
when they
still got
first
some
met
British
was,
autonomy there.
Hong Kong, yeah.
And the Hong Kong have contacts with Japan and Taiwan. And Beijing is very cautious about trying to pacify the people of Hong Kong.
It's my understanding also that after he had gone to Russia, they have granted him a 3-year extension.
That's right.
Yes.
He only got a 1 year the first time. Then it was extended.
Yeah.
Because Snowden is under indictment by Eric Holder for violating the Espionage Act of 1917. Well, if he's a constitutional lawyer, he must know that the Espionage Act of 1917 was passed by the Woodrow Wilson administration. And Woodrow Wilson got a declaration of war from Congress. That was a bona fide war.
Right.
Bush went into Afghanistan and Iraq on congressional resolutions because of the cowardice and the stupidity of both Democratic and Republican senators who do anything the president wants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Robert, if you're talking about Obama, yeah, I do believe he would know that. But as far as Eric Holder's concerned, unless Obama told him, I don't know that Holder would know that.
No, what's the
Well,
question?
you mentioned the fact that he was a constitutional lawyer.
That's what,
That's Obama.
yeah, that's Obama.
Yeah, but that's not Holder.
Well, what is Holder's background? He is a lawyer.
Yeah,
He is the Attorney General.
He is the Attorney General.
He's
but I
in the
don't-
charge of enforcing the Constitution as it stood.
I agree with that, but what I'm just saying, I don't, I would give Obama more credit for knowing that than I would Holder.
Well, I don't know. I haven't interviewed either one of them.
And chances are you never will.
But anyway, there's something a little bit fishy about Obama's law degree. That was investigated by Obama's opponents, okay?
Sure.
We haven't seen...
They're skeptical about every document associated with him, from his birth certificate
something,
to...
where did Obama get the money to run? Who financed him to go to Occidental College, transfer to Columbia, transfer to Harvard, run for the Illinois Senate, get elected, and then immediately into the U.S. Senate, and then immediately President of the United States. That's never been done.
Yeah, he had a meteoric rise.
Meteoric rise, and yes, we have a mafia in Manhattan, Hillary Clinton, and we have a mafia in Chicago.
The old Chicago machine
He got
still
nominated.
chugs
He
along.
got nominated because of the power of the blacks in the city of Chicago. And the Illinois senator, what's his name? The senior Illinois senator, Durbin. Dick
yeah,
Durbin
Dick
said,
Durbin.
yeah, he blessed Obama. Yes, send him into the Senate. Without Durbin's backing, he wouldn't have been elected so soon. State of Illinois, and then Obama won that election in 2008. Media people were all in favor of Obama. He has very good contacts with all of the media. Well, anyway, without Glenwall, there would be no Ed Snowden. Anyway, I'm for civil liberties. I'm for journalism. I'm for free speech, free press, and the extension of history. And we're going to have to find out more about these agencies as a citizen. we are going to, in my opinion, a police state. You have a more polite view. It's a deep state. Would you
Well,
like to
no,
clarify?
I think the police state is an accurate description. I think the deep state is just a term that's been used to describe the behind the curtain government.
The behind the curtain.
I guess.
That's surveillance.
Yeah, absolutely. The CIA, the NSA, all the agencies that you
Right.
mentioned, the FBI, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military,
Right.
this controlling apparatus behind closed doors that
Right.
pushes the neoliberal foreign policy agenda.
Right,
And,
right.
the
That's
surveillance
what
state.
journalists refer to as the shadow government.
That's a
Yes,
shadow government. That's
absolutely, the
another-
shadow government.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, this all goes back to George Orwell, 1984, a famous novel, in which he predicts all of this.
And
Big Brother is going to take over in 3 countries:
Big-
Soviet Union, People's Republic of China, and the United States. And NATO will become Oceania, and England will become landing field number 1, simply a puppet of the great American empire.
scary as it is, I'm not even. Orwell may have undersold it a little bit from what they were talking about.
Well, he didn't have the technology. He didn't know how fast the internet was.
And that's the scary part because of how much we rely on our technology and our phones. And this has all been exposed by what Snowden leaked.
Right.
They're able to track where you are, what you're spending your money on, who you're meeting with, what
doctor's
you're
bills, the
emailing,
doctor's bills.
your medical history, everything about you. And they're collecting all, they're not monitoring this in real time. What they're doing is they're collecting all of this information on every single one of us and
future-
storing it.
That's right.
So that if they ever feel like it, they can go back and look, they can pull up your file and find out all this information about you all the way back. And that's each and every one of us. And that's Americans. And we're being treated nicely compared to what they're doing as far as their investigation.
Benghazi,
of
what's that all
foreigners go. So it's a scary situation because there really is, if they ever wanted to change policy or decide to bring the hammer down, they have all the ammunition in the world to do it. And
I have no doubt
suppress
about that.
everybody.
Robert, I never asked you this, and perhaps David here could answer this question, but did Eric Blair,
Yeah.
did he write that book, 1984? Well, I mean, he did, but what I'm saying is, did he use the name George Orwell to...
Okay, well, I'll give you a little history of Eric Blair.
Okay,
Eric Blair was born in India,
okay.
and his father was not exactly an aristocrat, but he was in the upper class. And he was a Tory, he was a right-winger, and he served in the British India Civil Service. Now, this was back in 1904, when the British ran India and Pakistan, okay? So the job of the British civil servant was to collect the taxes in India. Now, when Eric Blair was 4 years old, the old man, I forgot his name. It wasn't Richard. I think it might have, no, Richard was not. It wasn't Richard Blair, but it might have been Richard Blair. He sent his wife and the young boy Eric near London to a prep school in order to get his education.
Okay.
So he arrives in England at age 4, and he goes to a little prep school called St. Cyprian. And he hated school. He was lonely, and he got into Eton, nevertheless.
Okay, Eton, wow.
So when he gets into Eton just at the time of the First World War. And he had as his professor Aldous Huxley, his tutor.
Okay, Robert, I'm sorry, I gotta stop you because we gotta take a station break.
Well, that came rather quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, so
What is this?
we are talking about Ed Snowden and surveillance and Glenn Greenwald and how the police state has been expanding in Britain and America ever since George Orwell wrote his famous novels. First, Animal Farm in 1946, and second, in 1984, which was 1984, 48.
48.
Yeah, it was reversed, okay. And those predictions have come more or less true.
Right.
Only we don't have a big brother. We got about 6 or 7 uncles and 8 or 9 nephews
Right.
who are all in this huge apparatus.
Yeah. I guess my question was, do you think that Eric Blair was afraid to use his own name when he wrote?
Okay, let's go back to Eric Blair. He had no idea he was going to write these novels. Eric Blair, when he graduated from Eton in 1921, he got out of Eton in 21, and he had problems of what he was going to do. Now, there's a lot of controversy about why he went to India. But one theory is he's going to go to India and work in his father's footsteps. And he gets a job in the India Civil Service, and he's stationed in Burma, which was administered by Britain at that time. And he joins the British Civil Service, okay? Now, another argument is that the young Eric Blair wanted to go to India to escape from England, because he didn't like Eton, he didn't like the English upper class, and he wanted to get into a Rudyard Kipling adventure thing.
Right.
Well, when he gets to India, he's a loner in the British Army. He pals around with Burmese. He learns the language, okay?
Yeah.
And he becomes a critic of imperialism. And one of his early books was called Burmese Days, in which he exposes the British Empire, okay? But that wasn't his first book. That was his second book. His first book is that he decided in 1927, just before the Depression, to go back to England. He said, I'm through with Burma. I don't want to have anything to do with the government, and I want to go back to London, and I'm going to write a novel. And his first novel was Down and Out in London and Paris. So he works as a tutor. He goes to Paris. He teaches French and English. He goes to London, and he lives with the working class. Yeah. So Down and Out London is about the bumming around in the working class. Yeah. Well, his father thought he was crazy. His mother gave him a little subsidy, but he managed to survive. And then he got this first novel published in 1933 at the depth of the Depression.
Yeah.
And it was the British Labour Party and the Popular Front and the United Front who said, this will go over because it's telling the middle class what the working class is all about. Well, it was through the Labour Party that he got into left-wing politics, through journalism again. Yeah. And then he was hired by his publisher, Victor Golans was his name, and he said, why don't you go to Spain and report on the Spanish Civil War? Well, that's how I discovered Orwell. He wrote his memoirs called Homage to Catalonia. And then he saw that Franco, Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, the British Labour Party, the British Liberal, they were all lying. That's how you get to 1984. You can't believe any journalist. You got to write novels or history.
So he used the pen name because he was living as a vagrant.
No, it was his publisher who said that.
Oh, okay.
He said, I don't want to publish under the name of Eric Blair because that'll insult my father.
Right, I see. Yeah.
He said, well,
I thought maybe there was some apprehension because of the fact that...
No, it was his father and mother. His father and mother. Yeah. His father disowned him. Okay. And he said, I don't want to embarrass them.
It was a parental
So it was the editor, Victor Golans, who said, well, there's a small river in England called the Orwell River. It's up near the Scotch border or something. Nobody had ever heard of it. Yeah. I never heard of the Orwell River. But it's a little stream. Sort of like Hocking River. You know, how many people in England have ever heard of the Hocking River? You know, so he said, "Okay, let's call." And then George is the most popular name in England. It's sort of like John in the United States or Joe in the United States. So George Orwell.
So there it is.
And then he published all under pseudonym. Well, only after he dies does it become known. Well, not quite. There was a little bit of hint when Animal Farm came out that his real name was Blair. And that came out. Well, anyway, that's a little bit of a digression. So we got to get back to the mainstream here.
Sure.
But that was a little bit of history.
Yeah, but it tells us the importance of Orwell and intelligence work and journalism, and sheds light. I'm sure
The
that
importance of
I'm sure
dystopian
that
novel fiction writing.
I'm sure that Glenn Greenwald knows Animal Farm inside out.
Oh yeah. Well, Animal Farm's an interesting case because they originally they wanted to ban it, and then they realized that it was a good tool against communism.
That's the established press again. Okay.
Yep.
Well, let's see if we can't bring this together then.
But the idea, I think, that it relates to Edward Snowden is the idea of dystopia, the idea of surveillance, surveillance that you cannot escape.
Right.
And
Okay.
that is the state that we are in America. We are all under surveillance and we cannot escape it.
True. No place to hide. Well, I guess we ought to change the theme a little bit. I'll ask you question 3. What is the importance of Henry Kissinger, and we'll never finish this, but we can begin it, as the #1 diplomat overshadowing all of the secretaries of state since World War II, whether they are Democrats or Republicans? And he then became an advisor in foreign policy of both Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. And he had 2 titles, National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. And he then was instrumental in influencing Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. And his understanding of the balance of power remains to this day. Do you want to say anything about this?
The significance of Henry Kissinger, that cannot be understated.
Right.
He was, as you said, one of the most important ambassadors, foreign diplomats, maneuverers. One interesting fact about Kissinger, it didn't matter whether Richard Nixon won that election or Hubert Humphrey won that election. He was going to become defense secretary either way, and that's what he went around telling people. He had played his cards. He was a master manipulator, and he had played his cards on both sides to hedge his bets so that no matter what, he was going to get the power that he was shooting for after that election.
Right.
He did some very big diplomatic things, such as the Nixon administration going to China. That was Kissinger's brainchild there.
That's
to
true.
open up China.
But
And only a Republican could do that at that time.
That took 4 years to pull off.
It did. Absolutely.
That was not easy. Because he had to lie to everybody.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well,
as all diplomats do, but he was a
that.
professional liar. Machiavelli,
Machiavellian would
Bismarck, Metternich.
Yeah, and Kissinger was a huge student of history, and of course he knew the history of all those people, and he saw what worked for them, and he knew how to apply it to modern day situations. He was big on power plays. He knew power structures. He knew how to manipulate power structures on the global stage, and he did so. Some would praise him for his effectiveness in doing so. I would criticize him for his lack of regard for human life and decency in his doing so.
Well, I think you could, if you're negative on Kissinger, you can say he extended the Vietnam War 4 years unnecessarily. He could have gotten out a little quicker.
He did.
But that's all history on hindsight. Maybe he could, maybe he couldn't.
Yeah.
You know, there's a book about Kissinger and Nixon called The Odd Fellows.
Mm-hmm. I haven't read that one.
Well,
I've read Christopher Hitchens' The Trial of Henry Kissinger.
Well, it was written by by Robert Dallek, who was one of the leading diplomatic historians. And I met David Dallek when he and I were both graduate students. I also heard Kissinger in person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I went to the University of Michigan. And when I was there in 1957 as a graduate student, the political science department had Kissinger over there on the table about 10 feet from us.
Wow.
There were only about 6 or 7 graduate students there. He had already written 2 books.
What an opportunity. Yeah.
About 2 books. Well, I already had an insight into Kissinger's mind because I was a student of diplomacy, and I had a famous indirect mentor. I never studied with him. But at the University of Chicago, there was a famous professor by the name of Hans J. Morgenthau. Well, I read Hans J. Morgenthau for my orals, for my diplomatic history. And Hans J. Morgenthau had both political science and history and invented the discipline of international relations. So in a sense, Kissinger followed Hans Morgenthau. Yeah, he says, I have to take both history and, well, he read Morgenthau, but he didn't go directly. You see, Kissinger got into this through his German language. He was born in Germany. His father came to the United States in 1938, time of the Munich crisis, when they saw that Hitler was going to go to war. And Kissinger went to high school in the Bronx, and he had a very modest ambition. He was going to study to be an accountant. Well, then he was drafted in the American Army, and he got the rank of sergeant. And because of his language, when the American Army invaded Germany, immediately intelligence picked him up and said, well, you interview all these Nazis, get them ready for the Nuremberg trials. Well, his colonel, a guy named Colonel Kramer, said to him, boy, when you get out of here, you go to Harvard and you get a PhD because you'll go right up the scale.
Yeah. And he did.
And he went to Harvard. He did. So then when he became advisor, he had contacts Harvard, MIT, and then when he did this book on the nuclear bomb, well, he had trips to D.C. His thing was how to use the nuclear bomb as a tactical weapon. Necessity of Choice was the title of one of his first two books. Yeah. And I had to read that as a graduate student, know what he was doing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess
he was when I talk about the deep state, he was one of the original prime manufacturers of this type of American foreign policy. Look at Chile, for instance, Salvador Allende and the overthrow of a democratically elected government in Chile at the hands of the machinations of Henry Kissinger and the United States deep state.
Okay, well, the problem in 1968, as you have pointed out, is that the Johnson administration bogged down in the swamps of Indochina. Johnson didn't know why he got into that war.
Johnson's huge mistake.
Well, he inherited it.
Yeah, he did from the Kennedy administration.
Well, and Kennedy inherited it from the Eisenhower. And Eisenhower got in there himself. He didn't have to.
Yeah.
Because the French got out in 1954, and they set up this idea of the 17th parallel. And the French said, okay, we're getting out of the north right away. We recognize Hanoi. And then they said to the Americans, since the Americans were financing the French stay in Indochina as long as possible, see, they said, okay, we have 2 years. And now we have hired a mercenary army of 175,000 Vietnamese citizens who have been serving our army. Do you want them, Mr. Eisenhower? They can all flee down to Saigon, and you can set up your own little puppet state called South Vietnam, the Republic of South Vietnam. Well, Eisenhower said, sure, let's do it. And that was John Foster Dulles. Dulles was the big anti-communist, you know. He said, well, we got to stand firm on communism. Well, they pick up this guy Noding Ziem, who was a monk in New Jersey. He was a Roman Catholic monk. They just pick him out and say, you're going to go to Saigon. You're going to become the president of this puppet state.
Oh, boy.
That's CIA.
It sounds like what we did in Afghanistan. We did something very similar.
That's right.
With
the Americans didn't know anything about Cambodia. They didn't know the language or Laos.
Yeah.
This was all under the French administration. Few of them even knew any French. Eisenhower at least knew a little French. So Eisenhower sets up a thing under General Collins called the American Advisor Group. And he's trying to build a mercenary army on the French base that can protect Saigon from Ho Chi Minh's guerrillas. So you have then a slow war in 54, 55, 56, 57, 58. And just when Kennedy comes in, they start getting into Laos. And Kennedy starts out in 1960 as an anti-communist hawk.
Yeah, yeah.
So Kennedy then was caught with Maxwell Taylor, and Maxwell Taylor says, okay, we can fight a land war in there.
Yeah.
So Kennedy was captive of the military-industrial complex.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because he came out, as you said, as a hawk.
Now, to get up to Kissinger real fast, when the debate was going on between the hawks and the doves, Kissinger said, well, I'm neither a hawk nor a dove. I'm a dog. I follow both sides.
Well, isn't that a smooth evasion?
There are good arguments for the hawks.
Depending on what's most convenient and personally beneficial at any given
There are good
time.
arguments for staying, and there are good arguments for getting out.
Yeah.
Okay.
From Vietnam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Kissinger never wanted this shifty Jew from...
Nixon?
Nixon didn't want him. But you know why he became the advisor?
No.
Nelson Rockefeller.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Nelson
Republican?
Rockefeller could not be a racist. He runs an international corporation. He has to hire Mexicans, Saudis, so forth and so on. So he says, here is a guy who worked for Standard Oil. He was the ambassador for Standard Oil.
Sure.
That is Kissinger was. So he says to Nixon, I'll endorse you for president if you take Henry Kissinger as your national security advisor.
Well, Nelson Rockefeller had plenty of not only business associates and business owners, but personal friends that were Jewish. You know.
He had a lot of juice in that then moderate, more moderate.
Yeah, this was a
Party.
moderate left-wing Republican who knew his facts, knew his history. And Kissinger, Nixon was just anti-communist for ideological reasons. The Democrats lost China.
He knew that it played, yeah.
And Nixon was afraid, Johnson was afraid of Nixon. He says, I don't want to wake up in the morning and see the Washington Post headline, Johnson has lost Vietnam. So he had to continue that war right up to the Tet Offensive.
Yeah.
And when the Tet Offensive broke out, Johnson says to himself, well, I can't run again as president. Yeah. But maybe Hubert Humphrey, with a new face and a little bit more liberal, can make it.
Yeah.
But he knew he could not get elected in 68. And that's how...
No. And especially with Bobby still alive and running at that time. And, of course, Bobby Kennedy and Johnson hated each other. But I think, the Vietnam era was characterized by two presidents, Johnson and Nixon, who I would both argue were pathological personalities.
Well, I wouldn't. But pathological that's a journalist term.
Yeah.
The journalists like to talk about psychology.
Yeah, well, maybe Snowden has a point. We do like personality in this country.
Personality, yeah. But I'm suspicious whenever I hear journalists talk about...
Trying to diagnose.
This is pop culture, right? Pop sociology, pop psychology, pop psychiatry.
Yeah. Well, I think the evidence is all in the tapes. Listening to those tapes.
All right, let's clarify this now. Are you saying that Kissinger was a liar? Yes. Johnson was a liar? Yes. Was Nixon a liar? Yes.
They were all master manipulators.
They're all but where does pathology come in? What's the difference between ordinary politics, white lies, and people who need to be institutionalized?
Yeah.
Who go around saying, I'm Jesus Christ. I don't think he was over the hill.
Oh, like crazy?
Yeah.
No, not crazy. Just perhaps sociopathic.
Well, where do you get sociopathic?
Where do I get that from? I get that from their base fundamental disingenuousness in dealing with other people. their base manipulation in dealing with others, their motivations for self-interest and manipulation over genuine communication
Well,
or interaction.
Stalin was the example of paranoia.
Yeah.
He purged
Well,
150.
you'd
50
agree that Richard Nixon was pretty paranoid himself, right?
Well, that's a question of degree, isn't it?
He might not have been Stalin paranoid. He
Well,
sure
okay.
wasn't throwing people in
he
gulags.
was
but
when he was
the
being,
tapes reveal that
or
he thought
when-
pretty much everyone was out to get him.
when we get to Watergate, this is when his John Dean and Eric Haldeman and
Oh, yeah.
yeah, these people begin to think that Nixon was certainly drinking, heavy drinking.
Yeah.
He was not getting much sleep. He was getting up 3 o'clock in the morning. But I don't think he was taking cocaine. I don't think he was taking heroin. I don't think he was bad as Hitler.
Right.
Hitler got into real drugs.
Yeah.
Now, nobody's ever seen the drugs of Stalin. Yeah.
And I think some of those people I've heard described as chronic misleaders.
Well, they were
That's
certainly
euphemistic.
lying.
But I just want to tell David this one because I know Robert's heard me say this. This is what Jimmy Carter, I heard him say on PBS one time on Bill Moyers. He said that George Washington could not tell a lie.
Yeah, that's a good joke.
Richard Nixon could not tell the truth. And Bill Clinton could not tell the difference.
Yeah, but
I like that.
Nixon could tell the truth when he exposed Chambers. That's how he got his reputation in the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Oh, yeah. He built
He built
himself up as an anti-communist.
He was a good lawyer, and he could smoke out liars.
And a good propagandist.
Well, he escalated the propaganda.
Yeah.
But he was a great opportunist in playing the anti-communist crusade.
Yeah.
Because
And to localize it, his father was born in MacArthur. Did you know that?
his father was
His
born
father was born in MacArthur, grew up in Columbus, moved to California.
and went in the drug business or legitimate pharmacy.
Yeah.
Sold aspirin,
Yeah.
not marijuana. Well, anyway, I would like to get back to the Vietnam War a little bit. There were two stages of this. The first stage was the stage of escalation from 1949 to 68, when Dean Acheson started this, because in 1949, Mao Zedong comes to power, and China then borders Indochina directly. And Dean Acheson was under the Republican criticism of allowing Mao Zedong to come to power and allowing Chiang Kai-shek to collapse. So Dean Acheson said, we got to defend Indochina first with the French. We're going to give the French money to hang on to Indochina as long as possible. And the Americans began to finance the last stage of the French War from 49 to 54. So without the American money, France wouldn't have stayed as long as they did. See?
Right, yeah.
So that was part of the escalation.
Spurring them on.
And then it peaks in 1968. And when Kissinger gets in there, he tells Nixon confidentially, you're going to have to de-escalate this war. You're going to have to get out. But we have to disguise the retreat. Because
So it doesn't look like they lost.
yeah, you're not gonna say, see, the problem with McGovern, he was too honest. He says, let's get out. Let's call the war over and let's go home. No, Nixon says, you can't do that. You got to retreat slowly.
Gradually.
Yeah.
And so that's why if you look at the troop levels in Vietnam, it's like a bell curve.
That's right.
That peaks
Gradual
in 68
de-escalation.
and 69 and then
Right.
goes back down.
So there were 165,000 American troops there when Johnson left. And in 72, there were only 20,000 Americans left there. So it was,
We only have 2 minutes left.
yeah, well, we're summarizing the Indochina War and how Kissinger came to power, and I guess we can get our 2-minute summary here of what we've been trying to do, how we go from intelligence into Kissinger's foreign policy. Would you like to?
Well, I think what we've been attempting to do over the last couple episodes here is analyze where we're at
Right.
with our police state and the surveillance state and the deep state,
Right.
and trace its origins back through the beginnings of the end of World War II and the beginnings of the military-industrial complex,
Right.
and the beginnings of our neoliberal foreign adventurism, to put it lightly.
Well, my summary is that Ed Snowden only went to the 10th grade. He didn't even get a high school diploma. And he was discovered that the CIA, the DIA, and the NIA, and DSA, CIA, DSA, and DIA were all fooling the American public. And then we got into Greenwald and how he understood history, World War I, World War II, the Indochina War, and he then informed Snowden, the partners, we can expose George W. Bush's war as being incompetent, and that will spill over to Obama. So we're leading from intelligence work, journalism, into foreign policy, and that's why we're introducing the importance of Henry Kissinger, and we'll have to continue that next time. And I always conclude with a slogan that debate is the oxygen of democracy, and Glenn Greenwald is one of the great debaters, and I think he is a hero for constitutional liberty, and you and I have to keep the ball rolling.
I absolutely agree. Thank you for having me, Professor.
Good. Thank you.